Now, here are two dualistic scenarios that both converge at a point, and it's the same point. So you have is ostensibly two triangles pointed at each other, but the apex of both triangles is the same point. It's a shared point. Okay. From the bottom, it's just what I described geometrically with the last diagram. We have circular relationships and linear relationships that produce a reflexive field, right, of things that are curved and straight in the infinite level of detail of their massing. They reach an apex point, which is that point that is usually interpreted as the point of origin and cessation, the coming from and going back to, just like we said, the Cartesian point, we could say. And to a certain extent, we could say that this field of circles and lines, which underlies all of the appearance around us, is interpreted dualistically. You can say, for the most part, that that's how it's articulated. The job of the mystic is to see the fundamental paradox of the essence in that dualism. And when we look at the Or Ein Sof has two parts to it. There's Ein Sof, which is literally the infinite. It means without end. It's pure open possibility, right? But it exudes a light, and that light is mirror-like, and it presents relationships as reflections in the mirror. And those reflections are called subject and object, internal and external, something and nothing. Whatever scenario is reflected in the mirror doesn't affect the mirror. The mirror has no image of its own. It just is the capacity to reflect any and all image, right? And that's the the light of Ein Sof. The problem with that Cartesian habit that people have is the emanationist idea that that light was somehow a created entity, that it came out of Ein Sof, as if Ein Sof stepped down to create its light, and that light was shaped into the circles and lines of the world. That's the exoteric narrative. That's the habit of people's conceptuality trying to make sense of the ground of all phenomena. They see that the creative agency of the light of creation must have been something that was created by a creator that is beyond. What I say that is really quite radical, but not unheard of, it goes thousands and thousands of years back, is that the Or and the Ein Sof are a fundamental unity that is beyond being and not being, because it's open. It's a pure open field of potential, but it glows. So the glow doesn't stop being open, and the openness always radiates. There's no point at which openness becomes light, because to assert that leap is to impose our dualistic habits upon reality. And the lightning flash is a pure paradox that this light, which appears and becomes all these dualistic relationships, is itself pure open possibility at the same time. It's a true paradox that only overtakes the mind in a lightning flash of breakthrough, because the rest of the time your mind is trying to make sense of putting pieces together dualistically. When you break through to the true non-dual root of phenomena, it is both infinite and finite at the same time. It is both immanent and transcendent at the same time, and there's no essential difference between them. So that non-dual paradox is where all the circular and linear relationships collapse. That's the point of Keter, which I call the ibri, meaning the point where you pass through. It's the root of existentiality. And which is beyond existence and non-existence. It's beyond the whole existential dilemma of yes and no, or positive and negative. And if you cross over that divide, there's no such thing as a negative limitless light anymore. There's no abyss to cross anymore.
Yeah,
Make sense?
yeah, absolutely. So I talked about the Parmenidean sort of challenge.
Yes.
But in the Pythagorean verbiage, it becomes a little bit, it's a little bit like neo-Pythagorean verbiage. It's a little bit more sophisticated. It's closer to what you're talking about. It becomes, and you doubtless know this already, but for the listeners, it becomes it devolves down into two fundamental principles that we see constantly in interaction, not only in math and in geometry, but in existence. And the words for that were uh, uh, peras and aperon, which means limited and the unlimited. And
Mm.
it's just, and the process of even doing geometry is a process of limiting the unlimited. These two things constantly interact with each other. They're these two forces that are ever present. And it's not being, and it's not non-being, and it's not something, and it's not nothing. It's just limit and unlimit, which is much, I think it's a little bit more what you're talking about here.
Well, the real challenge is first to understand the simultaneity of those two things, which produces this paradox. But after that, to live that way,
Yeah.
pure and simple. Like understanding it as a paradox is hard enough, but to allow that to seep through the flesh of appearance and be exuded by every instance of reality, every moment in time, every location in space, every so-called seemingly substantial part of the material universe singing that song, you
Mm.
know, resonating with this paradox.
Mm.
That's the challenge of contemplation.
Yeah, yeah. I don't even know if you would agree with this, but it just seems appropriate. One of my, I'm not even sure I agree with it entirely, but it again, it seems appropriate. One of my favorite movies growing up was this movie called Waking Life, and it's essentially this guy who just lives in this dream world, and he's going through this series of dreams and getting information from these dream characters. And one of the dream characters kind of tells him how he should be living it to reconcile paradox. And he says the key is to be in a constant state of departure while always arriving. And
Yes, the Ouroboros.
it's still that, I mean, 20 years later, that's like the one line I remember over and over from that movie.
But if you think about it, isn't that literally what's going on?
Yeah, and we're just confusing it.
Right, because the timeline is a completely artificial, invented scenario where show me the past, show me the future, even show me the moment of now. Right? Is this the moment of now? Oh, no, no, that's gone.
There it
Now, how
is.
about this
Oh,
one?
it's
Nope,
gone
gone.
again.
Right. So you can't catch the now. The future is a projected assumption, and the past will never be found. So you don't have either of those three to hang your hat on in any sense other than the artificial mechanism of trying to make sense of what's happening to you. So if you shift the meaning from this artificial grid work that the mind has defaulted to try to make sense of its situation, and you shift it to the primordial fire of sacrifice,
Mm.
the point where that point literally becomes no point, and the whole field is thrown in to the point, and its equalization with pure open fullness, it just takes over and swallows all of these philosophical divisions, because all of these divisions that we're making are only true either philosophically or in meditation when we get tastes of them. It's not in reality. Reality is a full simultaneous field which is always going all the time in constant motion, but its essence is unmovable, unchanging. And that living paradox, which is literally on fire when you discover the paradox, it's literally on fire and will consume you, right? The whole idea is either resistance to that and falling back into the habits, or this non-resistance, which is, and I gotta say, like, non-resistance to this is very, very difficult because it's painful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in a way it's like dying, you know.
Well, it's like dying in every moment.
Yeah.
And what happens is what comes up immediately for people on a personal level is emotional connections to loss. Because when you're asked to die in every moment, what's being called into question is everything that you love, everyone that you love, and your own self cherishing, right? And to part with that, sure, there's grandiose statements made all the time that people say, oh, yeah, I'm a big mystic. Look at my hat, for example, like, look at all the things I'm doing and, all the time I'm spending on all of this. Of course, I'm ready to die. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you think so, huh? Well, when it comes down to it, you're going to be sobbing like a baby, guaranteed. And if you aren't, then you're a psychopath.
Yeah, yeah, something's very wrong. Something's wrong. Yeah, yeah. This is an extremely important conversation, man. It really is. Like this kind of stuff is you don't normally hear this kind of talk outside of very, very tight, closed circles of people that are doing a certain type of work for a really long time. So I'm glad that we're getting to bring it out into the public. And not I don't want to backtrack too far, but I do also want to say I don't think I've heard you describe at least not one on one. I don't think I've heard you describe the light of the Ein Sof as this kind of reflective quality and
Oh, yeah, yeah. And
the
I've written about it quite a lot.
that mirror analogy that is one of the best analogies I've ever heard, and it blew my mind.
Well, keep in mind that the mirror, which is totally open but reflects everything, is not only inherent in the phenomena that you are perceiving, it's also your mind that can perceive it. So it's both on the part of the knower and the thing which is known. That means that it reconciles every level of the soul and every world, because the worlds are so called objective states, and the levels of the soul are so called subjective states. So the sum total of the subject and the object on every possible level are all that mirror. And it reflects the reflection. Remember what we said, Aleph is never less than two. That point of surrender always expresses itself dualistically. Well, that's what we have here, a subject and an object. You think you're a person perceiving a thing. That's the reflection in the mirror. Dualistic reflections. It's a hall of mirrors, actually.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. And that's actually um I know is very technical, but you got me so excited with the geometry piece. That square root of two kind of building outward uh rather than the golden proportion, the involution of the involutive source of creation, or at least the way that it appears. That building out is the Hall of Mirrors,
Mm-hmm.
because it's got that fractalizing quality that kind of happens when you put a mirror in front of another mirror, and then all of a sudden there's this literally a hall of mirrors just kind of simultaneously generated. So that is a fascinating way to look at not just the Ein Sof, but the mind.
Well, let's put it in a context that you'll be able to directly relate to. if we have Aleph is never less than 2, and that principle of doubling itself doubles, then 2 becomes 4, and then you have the quadrisected circle. Well, the reason why there are 5 worlds and 5 elements and 5 levels of the soul, and not 4, as the exoteric version of the esoteric would have us believe, right? You're with me on this,
Oh yeah.
is because at the heart of the squared circle is a central point. And that is the 5th point within the boundary lines, the axis lines of quadrisected space, which are the cardinal directions, the watchtowers, essentially. So when you have that heart point, you equalize the periphery of the circle that is seen as fourfold, right? The expansive space. And that's the gesture where the entire temple, the entire alchemical laboratory, and all of its peripheral envelopments is reconciled. Because when you have a quadrisected circle, the square inside the circle produces another circle, which itself becomes quadrisected, and you could draw another circle inside that, and on and on and on into the Hall of Mirrors. The only thing that is exempt, the point of freedom, is that 5th point, where you liberate the 4 external elements with the master principle of the 5th.
Yes. Yeah, and it's that same idea that you mentioned earlier with the Kav,
Yeah.
when as the axis mundi, right? And the world axis, thinking of it in that way, kind of interesting, right? Because the world axis doesn't it extends beyond space and time, right? It's not just our planet. It's the tele of our cosmos, and everything that kind of moves and changes around it is the galgal, right? Which is the whirlings and all this stuff. And so there's a saying that we have in the Golden Dawn ritual, but I'm sure it comes from somewhere else. While the wheel revolves, the hub is still, and that
Mm.
fifth, it's kind of that 5th principle that you're talking about, actually. And we have something very similar to it in the portal ritual of the Golden Dawn. You go through, and this is just something that may be a point of interest for the listener. When you go through the outer order, you're working the cross of the elements, the fourfold cross of the 4 elements. And you get this cross, and it's laid on top of a table. It's got all the different elemental colored arms. It's on the altar. And then the big revelation is that somebody comes and picks that cross up from the center, and it falls into this 5-fold pentagram. It's like you're grasping the 4 by the 5th principle, which is upright. It's the uppermost. It's the apex. It's the governing principle. There's
Mm.
something extremely powerful in that symbolic representation that it's sounding a bell in my mind when you're talking about this.
Well, the geometry of what you're saying is exactly what we were just elaborating, because when you connect an equal armed cross into a circular form where each part is measured equal with the other parts, right? They all meet at a central point. That's the point and the periphery of the circle that reconciles Keter and Malkut. And that's the point on the cross where the rose is. That's the point that unmakes the divisions, essentially, unmakes the prison cells, you could say. Paul Foster Case has a really interesting way of doing this in his elaboration of the GD symbolism, that he takes a normal cross, not an equal armed cross, and folds it into the cube of space. I'm sure you've probably seen this before. Well, the 6 faces of the cube meet at that same central point. So you have the entire Sefer Yetzirah there. You have 12 boundary lines, you have 3 axis lines making the cube, and then you have 7 planetary functions, the 6 faces and the one in the center.
Yeah, and most people expect Resh to be in the center, the sun, but it's actually Tav, that occupies the central space, I think, in the cube of space.
Well, that would be everything. That's the world, right?
Yeah, true.
So that would be the true Malkut.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Wow.
remember that from my old BOTA days, which
Yeah,
was
I
a
mean that stuff's fun, man. He really created quite a system of understanding this stuff in light of the Sefer Yetzirah. But and there's another. I think it might be in the Zalata ritual of the Golden Dawn, where they're explaining the relationship between Kether and Malkuth. And there's this, the person undergoing the ritual is now undergoing the lecture, and they say, Kether is in Malkuth, and
mhm.
Malkuth is in Kether, yet in another manner.
Yeah, after another manner, right.
After enough, and they don't say anything else, and they just kind of move on to the next subject, and you're like, no, 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 go back, explain that.
No, what they're doing is reconciling the Garden of Eden. Uh, yeah, I remember that one too. All of this is covered to a certain extent in cases True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order, which is like maybe his masterwork. The only problem with it is that people think that his solutions are the solution. And this is a problem with Kabbalah in general, because when you look at the Jewish history of Kabbalah and you see that every major Kabbalist literally had their own system, there isn't a thing called the Kabbalah. There's a million Kabbalahs. Each one of them's for a different school with a different emphasis, a different approach, right? Because it's fluid. It's variable. This is not a new set of laws. That the old laws are no good. Now you have the real laws, the esoteric laws. No, the whole thing is a process of infinite variation and discovery. And if you want to get into this stuff, the mistake is digesting a single system and thinking that it's authoritative. The way to break through that is digest multiple systems, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
this is the reason why when I was doing Golden Dawn, BOTA, all that kind of Hermetic Kabbalah stuff initially, this is one reason why I hit a wall, because I realized no particular school or lineage is going to be ultimately satisfying.
Right.
There's got to be a fluidity between systems
Right.
that I have to discover. And in order to do that, very often you have to leave the Hermetic context, which tends to have an absolutist view of its own symbol set.
Yeah, because it's highly the way that we receive it is highly constructed. Everything is about relationship. It's about, we kind of, and I don't want to generalize too much, but I see it often. We abandon the project of the building and for preference of the scaffolding. And now it's like the scaffolding is what's important, when in reality, these things are just helping us in our own understanding. They're supposed to, I think. But and another reason for this, just again as an aside, as commentary, is because a lot of people don't get through the actual system itself to the point of maturity to say, okay, well, all this stuff changes at a certain point. So what happens is you get this you get a pedagogical delivery of the system, which is meant to help you understand and memorize it, how to do this, how to correspond things. Um, and then you don't complete that and enter into the understanding that, oh, all these rules, I learned all these rules just to break them. It's the same thing with music, but a lot of people will go through, maybe half, or maybe even they get through the all 4 or 5 grades of the Outer Order of the Golden Dawn, where you're being taught all this stuff, and then they decide to go and either do their own thing or do their own order or do some version of it. And what they're teaching is not, it's, they're teaching like, it'd be like, and this is totally going to date myself, but you can edit this out. uh, when you learned cursive in school, and they gave you those like 3 little lines so you
Well,
could.
I didn't personally because I never went to elementary school.
Well, for anybody that's listening that's as old as I am and did go to school, uh, when you learn to write your letters, they usually give you like these 3 lines, this like what they would call like staff paper in music, and it's just so that you can get the proportions right. But then you don't use those lines when you go to write something. You know, it's like it was just there to help you guide and form your letters. And that's what I find is I find people taking the little guidelines and transposing them in places where it's not appropriate. And then what happens? They eventually get disillusioned and frustrated, or they get on the internet and become extremely contentious and start, bitching people out in forums and stuff.
Well, this is the way that people used to be trained in art school, which generally stopped in the middle of the 20th century, that you learned the rules so that you could forget them, but if you didn't initially get taught the rules systematically, you wouldn't have a skill set, right? So you learn the rules, develop the skill set, then you get to do whatever you want. But mid 20th century, they sort of did away with this idea of formal training completely, and art schools just became therapy sessions, basically. you know, and the thing about the ruach with the development of a human being, probably the biggest challenge for people, and nobody talks about this, are the attributes of chesed and gevura. And we talked about gevura a little bit with the developing that sense of awe, getting a taste of awe. But on the chesed side, it ultimately has to do with loving the divine, which is the same as loving the capacity to generate awareness, because awareness is given benevolently without end. Awareness is continuous. I'm not talking about your personal mind, which starts and stops thinking and feeling in patterns. I'm talking about the pure essence of awareness, which goes beyond personal consciousness. It's continuous because it is literally the Or Ein Sof. Your awareness is that light. It doesn't mean that you will recognize it as such, because that's extremely rare. But to love that open capacity to generate awaring as a verb, we could say, is completely constant and all pervasive and spontaneous, absolute, total, and marvelous. And once you're on that road, you can't help but love it. You have to love it. It's lovable. There's nothing else worthy of love than the divine. And if you embrace the divine as the essence of your own mind, both every state of knowing and every state that becomes known is thrown in. And this is that mirror that we spoke about, right? All of this is reflected in a mirror that has no image of its own, that is purely an open capacity to reflect. And that's the Or Ein Sof. So to divide Ein Sof and its Or, as if the Or was spit out somehow on the assembly line, reduces the magic of this to a mechanical process, which is antithetical to the awe, because it will only be truly awesome and awe-inspiring if the magic is incomprehensible to the mind, meaning you'll never get your bearings. You will never reduce it to an orientation that you can think you know what's going on. No, 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 no. No, we have to accept we will never understand this.